Coming up on Need to Know, Republican or Democrat? How about neither? Polls find young voters aren't particularly tied to either political party, but how they'll ultimately choose to vote carries some weight. What matters most to our region's young millennials and how to win their vote this presidential election season, that's next. Also on the show, historic moments over the past several decades preserved through clothing. An exhibit in its final days in Rochester is a walk down memory lane for some and a source of inspiration for a new generation. It's all coming up right now on Need to Know. Clinton, Cruz, Kasich, Trump, and Sanders. You can check each name off the roll call list for presidential candidates campaigning in Rochester. They are just in time for next week's New York primary. But is their message resonating enough with young voters to get them to the polls? Bloomberg News reports that millennials are now the largest share of the voting age population, and they have the power to swing the presidential election by either turning out to vote or staying home. So what will it take to win the millennial vote? And what matters most to our region's young people this presidential election season? Joining me to answer those questions and more is Anna Garvey, president of the University of Rochester's College Republicans. Michael Montemalo, a political science major at St. John Fisher College and a member of the National Political Science Honor Society. Elizabeth Ike, undergraduate president at Nazareth College, and Donald Lawrence, a legislative aide to Rochester City Council member Matt Haig. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So there are a number of polls out there, and they are all attempting to nail down what's important to all of you, to the millennials. So while candidates, they are constantly trying to appeal to all categories of the electorate, is there a sense that they are making that connection with you right now? How are they pulling you in, and how are they pushing you away? And I'll start with you, Anna.
I think this election, especially this primary, has been so long and dragged out that it's been tough for people, but also interesting for them to keep up with, especially millennials. I think obviously you see someone like Bernie Sanders getting a lot of millennial support, and then someone on the other side like Donald Trump really pushing them away. I don't know if that's necessarily reflective of their feelings towards either party, but just like the characters that we sort of have in this election.
And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there about the political process itself and the way the parties work. I think a lot of people are frustrated about the whole thing with Democrats and superdelegates. And I think a lot of people are experiencing this whole rush. It's almost like a crash course on politics and civic duties. And then people are getting confused and frustrated because they're not completely understanding the entire process.
Interesting. What do you think accounts for that gap, that misunderstanding?
I'm not sure, because I really think it's more so the fact that the millennials never really were engaged in the elections prior to this election. And I think that now that like you said, we are making up the larger voting block that we are starting to get focused on, and the messaging from the candidates themselves are starting to focus on us. And I think that's resonating with some people, and then getting people like, oh, they're actually focusing on me. They're actually talking about me and talking about issues I care about. And I think that is kind of pushing them to actually learn more about and all the weird little intricacies, the way that politics work in America.
Yeah, and I think another big issue that millennials have is the media. I mean, we are one of the first generations to really be involved with the media and be on the media and use it a lot. And that portrays candidates the way the media portrays anyone. I mean, that's another big issue that I think, which is something that I've been working on, is like they don't see candidates the way that they should be seeing them, which is like their issues that they have. They're seeing them as the memes that are put on social media.
So you think the media is causing a distraction just in terms of portrayal?
100%.
I completely agree with that, especially since this election is one of the bigger elections that have been on social media. A lot of millennials, they go on Facebook or Twitter, they see the sound bites, the pictures, the brief 140 character things, and it really doesn't represent what the candidates are saying, and it's almost impossible to make a coherent policy proposal through those different mediums.
Yeah.
So
It's almost like you have to bushwhack through all the
Yeah.
all the stuff that's on social media. I think that's a lot of it is because back when Obama was doing his presidential campaign, he really focused on social media, and now he was so successful in that more and more candidates are becoming, and more tacticians in politics itself are becoming adept at social media and realizing this is a huge way to get people motivated. And I think that's really playing out this election.
Well, through past the frustrating aspects of dealing with this, I'd like for all of you to weigh in on this, just to kind of get a sense of the varying perspectives and possibly even the similarities. What is the single most important issue to each of you this election season that really is weighing heavily on who you would choose to vote for when it comes to the presidential candidate for this election season? Elizabeth?
I think one of the biggest things that I think millennials are looking at is someone that can really bring America back together with everything that's been going on, the terrorist attacks. Obviously, people want to see a change in that. People want to see a difference. And honestly, I think it hasn't been doing that. The election process hasn't been doing that anyways. Not necessarily a candidate hasn't been doing that, but the division hasn't really brought people back together. It's actually separating them, I think.
And I think, for me personally, I think what's driving me to vote for who I'm voting for in the election, as well as other candidates, not just the presidential election, is the practicality of their policy viewpoints. And really, I'm more of an incrementalist, and I think a lot of the candidates this election season are very revolutionary in their ideas. So I think that's definitely playing well with millennials. But for me personally, I think I'm a little bit away from the pack in this one, more of an incrementalist, and looking for slow change and slow progress as opposed to vast, huge changes that may or may not happen.
I think for me, on a personal level, I don't know if my voting as a millennial is that different from like a just regular Republican that's out there looking for who to vote for. I think I tend to look for the person who I think has a conservative message that focuses on free markets and helping people up by their own individual gifts. But I think, like, as far as millennials, that's also sort of a focus, is just the economic message. And depending on your political leanings, like, that's sort of causing another one of these divisions, like you guys are talking about, where, like, some people are going and sort of sticking with this, you know, capitalist, like, free market thing, and then you have Bernie Sanders, who's sort of like, you would never think in an American presidential election you would have somebody talking about the value of democratic socialism, as he calls it. So I think, but I agree that I think millennials, and for me personally, that you're looking for somebody who can sort of bridge this divide as we become more and more separated by party and ideology.
So I look at it from a more pragmatic point of view. I understand that, and I think some of my peers don't really see it this way, that there are three branches of government, right? There's the judicial branch that interprets the law, there's the legislature that creates the law, and there's the president that enacts and enforces it. And when it comes down to it, these presidential candidates, they may have big plans like a wall or free tuition, right? But those will never pass the Congress, no matter how Republican or Democrat. And we can look back to 2008. Barack Obama had essentially an open slate to do whatever he wanted with a completely Democratic Congress, and passing health care was a huge hurdle. So I'm looking at the president as the commander-in-chief of the United States of America, and I'm looking for the most stable candidate that can lead America, that can have a robust foreign policy, a robust defense policy, a robust domestic policy, and have realistic plans to enact those plans.
I want to ask, polls find the young people lean left, and they also find that about half of millennials don't identify with either political party. Is there a sense among you as to why? And Michael, I'm going to give this to you because I understand that you can see both sides of the aisle, and you kind of consider yourself sometimes in the middle.
Sure.
So why? What's going on?
Well, when it comes down to it, you know, parties, they're lazy, right? People get general agreements and then they go to one side or the other. It's not that simple. As I just said, I agree in a strong foreign and defense policy, right? But when it comes to social issues, I'm very liberal. I think that we should continue the way that the current presidency has been choosing to enforce and not enforce certain laws to make sure that people are created equal, that people are treated equal and fairly. So it's not as cut and dry as left or right, I don't think. I have my arms in both sides of the aisle.
Social issues are issues of importance to millennials, and that is something that we know and that research has presented based on polls. Do you find that social issues are something of importance in this presidential election cycle, or I'm talking about race relations, Black Lives Matter, poverty, gay rights, and that kind of a thing? Is this a priority for this voting base right now, or are we not seeing this with the presidential candidates? I'm curious to kind of get your take on this.
I think the huge part of it is a lot of millennials do really have very liberal social viewpoints, but the problem is in the Republican side, you have the establishment candidates realizing this and not saying they don't want to make a message on something, have a concrete statement, because then they'll lose some of the older voters that do have very conservative viewpoints. Whereas the Democrats mostly agree on the social issues and the liberal social viewpoints, and the real opposition is the breakthrough candidate as Bernie Sanders, pushing Hillary Clinton to the left on economic issues. So I think he is really driving on the Democratic side, driving the debate towards economic issues rather than social issues, because they both realize that the social issues aren't really where the fracture is.
I do think that that's a weakness of the Republican Party right now, where a lot of younger people especially perceive them as being very, like, the sort of socially conservative aspects of the Republican Party that maybe the older generations still value and the younger generations are moving away from. I think it's part of the reason why more young people don't identify as being Republican, and probably, like you said, more of the reason that they really don't want to be in either party, where they can see themselves aligning like these social issues with the left, but believe in some of the other like aspects of the right. But I think if you look at somebody like John Kasich, the way he's approached a lot of this, just softening his tone on it a little bit, or talking about like same-sex marriage. You know, he says, "Oh, I went to a friend of mine got married last year. It's no big deal." And I think that's why he, out of all of the Republicans, also I think resonates more with younger people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the times, I mean, specifically what I see at my school is that people don't, in our generation, because it is their first time voting, they don't see all the issues. They don't look at all the points of view. And I know a lot of college students, they're in college, they're not in the economy. All they are worried about is their college tuition. So what are they focused on? They're only focused on the social issues. And a lot of times I don't think that they see the economic issues unless they're really involved with it. So.
Right, or the foreign policy issues.
Yeah.
What are you waiting to hear from candidates that will win you over that you have not heard yet?
That is such a good question, because I still don't even know who I'm voting for on Tuesday.
That Donald Trump suspends his campaign.
Yeah.
Okay.
But really, I just want to hear coherent policy proposals. I don't want to hear these grandiose promises. I don't want to hear these things that will never happen, right? I want to hear realistic things that are possible to happen, especially in the political environment that the Congress is in, right? You have a Democratic House, or I'm sorry, well, divided government.
Yep. Anyone else?
I think
Before we close?
if I actually went to see John Kasich when he was in Greece, and I
me
thought, yeah, I thought he was pretty good.
Yeah, I think he
definitely
did really
got some support from people there, and I think I would be really comfortable with as the head of my party, as a Republican nominee. But I think I would have a much easier time like running to the polls and voting for him if he just like started to talk a little bit about the conservative values. He talks about local government, but he just misses some of the like conservative Republican buzzwords, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's really missing is the environmental issues. Like for the Democratic candidates, they briefly touch on it every so often. Like Bernie's recently criticized Hillary's fracking ideas, but I think I'd like to see both candidates really see what their environmental proposals are, both for the world and the country.
Yeah, I agree with environmental.
Well, I appreciate all of you being here. A special thank you to my guests for sharing your insight and your perspectives on some of the key issues of this election season. And for continued election coverage and results from the New York primary, be sure to tune in to WXXInews.org. The late Eunice Johnson is known as a pioneer in the fashion world. Her influence, while global, reached Rochester, where it can still be felt today. Johnson was the force behind Ebony and Jet magazines, two African-American publications founded by her husband's business, the Johnson Publishing Company. Eunice Johnson is the visionary who fought racial prejudice to bring high-end couture fashion from Europe to the U.S., in particular to African-American audiences through the Ebony Fashion Fair. For 50 years, the Fashion Fair runway shows visited cities around the country, making designers accessible where they previously were not. And now some of the most prized garments from the Ebony Fashion Fair are on display for the final days of the Memorial Art Gallery's Inspiring Beauty 50 Years of Ebony Fashion Fair exhibit. So just what does it take to preserve history through fashion? The MAG's Director of Exhibitions, Marie Villa, explains. Take a look.
It's certainly an enormous responsibility to preserve this number of outfits. Mrs. Johnson committed to buying outfits for her fashion fairs instead of borrowing them as many do. And so at the end of the season, she would have dozens and dozens of clothes every single year that had to be stored. So there are literally thousands of these outfits that are in the archive of the Johnson Publishing Company. We were required to have someone with textile conservation experience on hand when the unpacking was done. And so actually we had the expertise of Gretchen Spittler, who works at WXXI, to help us with that. The mannequins mostly come already dressed. They're all packed with Tyvek and Ethafoam and lots of padding to make sure they don't shift around on the mannequin too much. It really is a complicated process. The organizers sent a curator with this show to lead the installation. Even still, over the years that they had been worn and then stored, a lot of damage had occurred naturally. You can imagine if they did 180 shows in a year, that same dress was flounced down the runway 180 times, and there was a little bit of dirt, there was a little bit of rippage, et cetera, et cetera. So when the curators selected the garments that would be in the exhibition, they embarked on a massive conservation program to fix and refurbish the outfits. Some of them still have some staining, for example, in the back. And we would receive a very thick instruction manual on how to display each dress. And there would be instructions as to whether we should hide the back or whether this could be seen in the round, for example. We are also aware that loss continues to go on. So we monitor carefully for sequins that have fallen off or little bits of feathers and so on, and gather those and send them back to the originator at the end of the show.
The Ebony Fashion Fair made a number of stops right here in Rochester during its 50-year run, which ended in 2009. According to the Johnson Publishing Company, the Fashion Fair raised more than $55 million for charity, including the United Negro College Fund and sickle cell anemia research. Joining me to talk about the lasting impact of the Fashion Fair on Rochester is Lamar Jackson, a former mistress of ceremonies for the Ebony Fashion Fair shows in Rochester, Deborah McDowell Hernandez, curator of engagement at the Memorial Art Gallery, Dorothy Dunwoody, a regular attendee of the Ebony Fashion Fair shows in our community, and Juanita Washington, publisher and editor-in-chief of Breakthrough Magazine. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
So just to begin, I want viewers to get a sense of what it meant to have the Ebony Fashion Fair come to Rochester. Marie Villa said it was considered by some to be the event of the year. You planned your outfit months in advance. What did it mean for Rochester to have this event here?
It was a major social gathering. I mean, people would, when we moved to the hotel, people would plan dinner, and they would leave work early, have dinner, and then walk down the hall right into the show. It was an event. There was entertainment included because they had a great musical director, David Rivera, who literally was part of the show in terms of how he conducted the music he used, the scores, and how he presented it. Local musicians were hired to accompany him, and people were amazed. They came because it was exciting. They got to see everything that they could dream of, some things they could buy and wear, but at the same time they were able to talk with people, see people they didn't see from, the last year. And it also was an interesting time because people wanted to support the activity. I mean, that was critical. Mrs. Johnson did it not just to bring fashion into the African American community, but it was to raise money. So all the civic organizations that brought it to the cities, the 180 cities, the money had to go to a good cause. And in Rochester, it went to the Scholarship Fund, which was really a community scholarship, not just for the church. So that was her passion, to bring fashion, but also to see that money got raised for a good cause. Locally, over the course of the years, and we didn't do it every year. The church started out doing it every other year, and then they did it every year. But over the course of the time, over $130,000 was given. And this wasn't just, as I said, to church members. So some years you might get 400, but you had 5 students. And there were students that got carried through the whole 4 years and into law school. So it was a major way to raise money and to make people aware of what good there was. Because that was the other thing. For so many, media outlets, it's the negative. This was definitely a positive.
Dorothy, what do you remember? Because your son tells me you attended the shows from the late 50s to the late 70s, and you even won a trip.
Yes, I did. I won a trip to Puerto Rico. It was about 3 months after he was born. And I went to the show, and I was sitting there. But before we went in, I had told my girlfriend, I said, well, if I win, I'll take you with me. And she said, okay. So when we went in, we were sitting there, and they were calling off names and everything. And then they called off my name. And I just sat there because, and she said, Dorothy, that's you. I said, oh, it's me? And I said, here I am. And I went up, and I was speechless. I didn't know what to say, but I thanked them. But the Ebony Fashion Show, it was a big thing for us. We would dress up in evening gowns or semi-gowns and go to the show, and it was just magnificent. I loved it.
I want to get, Deborah, I want to bring you into this. I want you to explain, how did the Memorial Art Gallery, I know you've been working to incorporate all sectors of the community really to come to this inspiring beauty exhibit. Talk about the initiatives underway over the past couple months at the MAG to ensure that the exhibit is accessible.
Yes, well, one of the latest initiatives that we have is called Transportation Outreach Initiative. So we've been reaching out to local agencies, not-for-profit organizations, churches, recreation centers, and connecting with their representatives and basically providing their clients with an opportunity to visit us. We provide a bus, a University of Rochester shuttle bus, that picks them up, brings them to the museum. They receive free admission once they arrive, and at the end of the visit, if they complete a form, we will give them a free family membership to ensure that they're able to come back even after Inspiring Beauty has left. So that's been a very popular one. We've been reaching out to youth, to teens, to senior citizens, so across the board as far as the population goes. We also, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
I was going to tell you about one that's already passed was Teen Fashion Camp. Yeah. We offer 2 sessions of that, and one of the great perks with that one was that the teens involved were also able to keep the sewing machine. So each youth was given a sewing machine to use over the course of the sessions, and at the end they were surprised and told, now you get to keep it, to keep nurturing that interest and passion in sewing and design.
I have a mentee who was involved in that, and she was thrilled that she got to keep her sewing machines. That was huge for her. Juanita, you interviewed some of the original fashion fair models for the winter issue of Breakthrough magazine to coincide with the exhibit at the Meg. Breakthrough, to me, in my opinion, like Ebony Magazine was really launched to cater to an audience not being served by the masses. And I wanted to kind of get your take on this. Mrs. Johnson wanted to shift cultural attitudes in terms of the portrayal of people of color in the media. Where do you think we stand today? You're in the media in a variety of ways. Where do you think we stand today with Mrs. Johnson's vision?
Well, you know, I think that it's interesting because in many ways there has been progress, but in many ways I believe that we're kind of still in the same spot. There are several avenues that we have not even explored. One being the reason why I even decided to create the magazine. And even in our own area, what happened was I looked around and I really saw that there was no platform at all to showcase all the great women of color, just women of color, period, in our area, to really celebrate them in ways. You know, we had a lot of publications, but we were missing from them. And so I decided to, you know, instead of wait for us, I decided, why shouldn't we just go ahead and do it? And I gained a lot of inspiration from magazines and publications like Ebony, because that's exactly what they were about. They were about community. And even with the fashion fair, they were about scholarships and providing other opportunities. The models we spoke to said it provided them a way in the business, because at that time, African American models were very few and far between. And so it provided jobs, not only for models, but people who worked behind the scenes. And so I thought that was a really great aspect, because even today, we still have to find opportunities and our way in the door. So I think that it was great. Even with Breakthrough, what we're doing is trying to create scholarships. And I think having a standard set by publications like Ebony is what is really how we should move it forward.
Well, a special thank you to my guests for joining me today. And you have about a week left to get to the Memorial Art Gallery to see Inspiring Beauty, 50 Years of Ebony Fashion Fair. The exhibit comes to an end on Sunday, April 24th. Check out the world-class designs of Alexander McQueen, Christian Dior, Oscar de la Renta, and others. For more information, go to mag.rochester.edu. And that is it for this edition of Need to Know, Rochester's news magazine. I'm your host, Helene Bianduti-Hofer. Thank you for joining me tonight and throughout the weekend. I'll see you next week right here on WXXI TV.